Welcome to the final in our series about John Wesley, and we've arrived in London. Behind me is the Westminster Central Hall at the very heart of London in Parliament Square. We're going to be exploring during the show today something more about John Wesley, and particularly focusing on his social engagement and politics. I hope you really enjoy the show. In 1739, Wesley erected the first chapels of his societies in Bristol and London. Almost 40 years later, he was to lay the foundation stone for one of his last. Wesley's chapel was opened on the 1st of November, All Saints' Day, 1778, just 11 years before John Wesley died. I met with Lord Leslie Griffiths, the minister there, to tell us more. Lord Griffiths, but in this case, Leslie Griffiths, the minister of Wesley's Chapel. It's good to talk to you.
Well, thank you very much. But in every case, Leslie Griffiths, and in this place, there's only one Lord, and it isn't me.
That's great. And look, tell us a bit about this chapel, because when you come into it, you have a real sense of history, don't you?
Yes, you do, although I must say the fine Georgian grandeur built by one of the greatest architects in London at the time, and full of splendour and beauty and all the rest of it. I keep on reminding people that for 40 years before this, John Wesley operated in a broken down, rambling set of premises called the Foundry. And that's where real Methodism began, where the mission to the poor and all the other things were so well done. And here, when Methodism enters its mahogany phase, you've got to be careful of bourgeois attitudes setting in. So we can enjoy it, we can love it, but we mustn't be seduced by it. So it's a great, great place to be.
Now, Leslie, in the early days, as was found in Bristol, John's ministry was not just about preaching. There was the feeding of the poor. And here there was some of the first free medicine, wasn't there?
Well, it's extraordinary. I mean, there was, well, a prototypical national health service, free at the point of access. And in order to fund it, he went out begging in all the rich houses in the vicinity. So he set up this fund, and it wasn't just for Methodists, everybody. There was a ragged school for boys and girls. There was a ministry to people on death row at nearby Newgate Prison. There was a revolving loan fund, helped lots of families out of cash flow problems, and set up a number of businesses, including the biggest book business in Britain, started with a little dip into that fund. So all that kind of stuff all the time.
And he was always ahead of his time. You almost talk about microfinance, can't you, when you start talking in that way, of seed funding things?
Absolutely right. And the great thing was that although Methodism was beginning to have a shape and some energy in it, and you could have really said, that's what I want to be doing, just that, he was always looking beyond the group of Methodists to see how the Methodists could serve the wider community. It's quite an extraordinary way to keep your eye on both of those balls at the same time. He's a very remarkable man. And also, you know, his preaching, which is about salvation for all through God's grace, which is for all. It wasn't just fine words, honeyed words from pulpits. It was translated immediately into action. It's a terrific achievement.
Leslie, talking about pulpits, your ministry has been in various different places, but it must be a delight for you to preach the gospel here to a congregation from people from all over the world.
Well, John Wesley said, I look upon the whole world as my parish, and the whole world has taken him seriously and come to live in his parish. So we've got 36 different nationalities present in our congregation. We've doubled our membership in the last 10 or 15 years, and we've got more than 24 languages other than English as first languages. This is Pentecost every single Sunday.
And for a Welshman who never loses the love of Wales.
Oh, well, of course, and of course the Welsh language, of course, being the language of heaven, is the benchmark for all the others, and I keep on reminding them of that.
Leslie, you're still as biased as you ever were, really.
Well, it takes one to know one, I'll tell you that.
Tell me a little bit about the ministry here and how important that is.
It's amazing. I mean, first of all, that something begun in those circumstances for that age continues to vibrate and to resonate with the main motifs of this age. Simply says that the package as originally formulated had the capacity to develop, to mutate, and to become something appropriate for each age. And, you know, Charles Wesley said that he wanted to serve the present age. Well, this is the present age. We have outreach to the community, we have ministry through schools, interfaith work to die for, really, community work, community regeneration, all the inner city stuff. We have street and gang activities that we have to deal with, crime on the streets, drugs being pushed. We're right on the edge of London's clubbing district, and that gives us opportunities with young people, especially in the middle of the night. I mean, I wish I had a special worker just for that, let me tell you, because there's tons of work to do. So I think that it's strategically placed. And now, of all things, the roundabout, the ugliest roundabout in London, which is at the end of our street, is being called Silicon Roundabout, because to rival the Silicon Valley at San Francisco in America, all the high-tech industries are centering on our roundabout, this miserable, squalid roundabout that we're situated by. So lots of business and activities coming our way, lots of residential activity as well as business activity. So the sky's the limit. I just think this is a fantastic place.
And in the tradition of Lord Soper, who many people in Sydney, Australia would be familiar with, and he travelled around Australia, you now stand in the tradition of those who sit in Parliament.
Well, it's very interesting because I was once Donald Soper's superintendent. For 5 years, I was his boss. He never did a thing I told him to do. But he was great. But I learned a lot from him, of course, both about speaking in the open air, which I did my fair share of, and latterly, he was dead by then, of course, in the House of Lords, where, like him, I took the Labour whip. The Prime Minister offered me the crossbenches to be politically neutral, but I said, I don't want to go into a political arena and not do the politics, number one, and number two, politics are far too important to leave to politicians. So I'm enjoying it thoroughly.
And that gives you opportunities where the gospel and speaking the truth about the poor, the marginalised, and those come together.
No, there's no doubt about that. I mean, the opportunity is fantastic. First of all, it's a parish, and I care pastorally for huge numbers of them in there. But secondly, it's a platform. And from that, I can, whether in debate or by calling meetings myself, I can advocate the causes that matter most to me. But secondly, in terms of framing legislation, the laws of the land, I can have a voice in the saying. And by taking a party whip, I can, of course, get into government offices and talk to ministers of government and express my disquiet or urge them to go a second mile. And everybody knows that I'm a Methodist minister making these views.
Just to wind back as we draw to a close to origins, I'm very conscious of coming from the northwest of England. You come from South Wales, and for both of us it's been very simple, humble origins. Tell me about that.
Yes, well, I mean, I was raised in a one-parent family, 2 boys, raised by a single mother in one room in a brickyard. And it's almost impossible for me to imagine that now. I preach from John Wesley's pulpit. I have my own seat in St. Paul's Cathedral, and I have a seat in Parliament. I mean, it's a long way from one room in Buryport in South Wales. But I did learn all the most important, and not liking religion, let me tell you. I mean, my mother used to say to me, the chapel, I'm not going there. She'd say, I'm divorced. I like to smoke. I like a little drink. I put 6pence each way on a horse. My football pools, I send them in the post every week. And I love my bingo. And she said, I'm not going to go to chapel because the preachers will just have several reasons for telling me I'm a wicked woman. And she wasn't a wicked woman, she's fantastic. So, I mean, growing up in those sorts of circumstances, you learn some of the roughest lessons in life, and you never forget them. And they've shaped me, certainly, and given me this visceral identification with the poor. I will not have the poor patronized. I'll not have them treated like dirt, because I was once treated like that myself.
Leslie Griffiths, it's lovely to talk to you. God bless your work here, and particularly the congregation here at the City Road.
Thank you very much, Keith.
In the rooms below City Road Chapel, there's a museum which highlights John Wesley's lifelong journey. Among the prized artefacts, his pen, highlighting the last letter he ever wrote. The letter was addressed to William Wilberforce, urging him to carry on his campaign against the slave trade. Wesley died on the 2nd of March, 1791. He was 88 years old. His ministry and methods set to change the face of nations in the centuries to come. I met with a former member of Wesley Mission staff in Sydney and former president of the Methodist Church in Southern Africa to tell us more. Peter Story, it's good to talk to you in this place that is very much a Methodist centre. And in the South African context, how important for you has the John Wesley story been?
Well, apart from the Jesus story, the John Wesley story is the one that shaped me. And in terms of deciding what kind of stand to make in apartheid South Africa, it was absolutely crucial to stand with the allness of what Methodism teaches and preaches. That word all is in so many of Charles Wesley's hymns. It's in Wesley's first great sermon, of course, after his conversion, that all people, it's open to all. Now, in a country where the doors were closing to certain people and opening only to others, there was a clash between what we as Methodists stood for and what the apartheid regime stood for. And so they were on a collision course. I remember my father was head of the Methodist Church in the 1950s, and he was saying at that time that so long as one white person and one black person were friends, the apartheid regime would be unsatisfied, would believe it had failed. As far as Methodists were concerned, as long as one white person and one black person remained enemies, we as Methodists would have failed. So we were on a collision course with the state, and we had to witness against it.
And for many people, that was a costly journey.
It was, and I think, that there were centrifugal forces. We who had a white background had to struggle with our conditioned racism. Those who were black South Africans and black Methodists had to struggle with the inferiority which had been drilled into their minds and hearts, and they had to be liberated from that. And it was in 1981, really, where the Methodist Church of Southern Africa came together in a remarkable gathering in order to decide what did it mean to obey Jesus Christ in apartheid South Africa in the 1980s. And the Obedience 81 Conference, as we called it, produced a declaration which I remember as being head of the Methodist Church quite soon thereafter. I was able to carry around the country and say, this is what we stand for. If you as a white Methodist are not happy to be part of an integrated church, then find another one. And so we are immensely grateful for the heritage of the Wesleys, which did not permit us to become enslaved. Although we were touched in many ways by the wrongs of apartheid, and we reflected in many ways in the life of our church, somehow that heritage saved us from going down that road too far.
Let me ask you another question about Africa. We've looked at the different influences of John Wesley. Education was a very, very key influence. How would you reflect on that?
When the apartheid regime came into power, which was 1948, 80% of black South Africans in school were being educated by churches, by mission colleges, and the Methodists were the largest of them all. Nelson Mandela is the product of a Methodist education, and he looks back on that chapter in his life as very, very formative indeed. So we are immensely proud and grateful for the heritage in education that Methodism has in Africa, and I'm quite sure in many other parts of the world. When William Shaw, the sort of pioneer missionary of the Eastern Cape in southern Africa, established a mission station, it was always a chapel and a school, a chapel and a school, a chapel and a school. Never the one without the other. And so I think he was following the Wesleyan, John Wesley's own commitment to education for all. There was a time when the leadership of the ANC, who finally became the liberation movement that brought us to freedom, we're almost all products of Methodist mission education.
And we're at a place here where they had not only education, but they also gave food to people who were in need, and not just in a philanthropic sense of here's something just to keep you by, but that was seen as part of the gospel. It wasn't an addition to the gospel, it wasn't a follow-on, it was the gospel itself.
Oh, these are Christian practices which I think, preceded John Wesley's so-called conversion. Sure. I'm careful about calling the 24th of May a conversion because I really believe he was on a journey. And it was a journey into discovering the wholeness of holiness and the responsibility for your neighbor. which was just built into the Christian faith and is the second great commandment. So I think Methodism's witness in the area of social justice, I'm very proud that the trade union movement was born in Methodism. I'm very proud that a Labour Party Prime Minister could say socialism in England owes more to Methodism than to Marx, the working class does. I'm very proud that we're part of a working class movement.
It's been 200 years since the first Methodists met in Australia. To celebrate 2 centuries of faith and pioneering care, CEO and presenter Reverend Dr. Keith Garner takes us back to where it all began.
But we don't begin here at the heart of London. We begin in a town in the north of England.
In this fascinating narrative, Reverend Garner chronicles the history of the life and times of the founder of Methodism, John Wesley. This fresh and thought-provoking documentary takes us on a journey throughout the United Kingdom, beginning in John Wesley's hometown of Epworth.
John Wesley was born here on the 17th of June, 1703.
This 1-hour DVD travels onto his education years and beginnings of social justice in Oxford, to his final years in London. For more information on John Wesley, the man and his mission, call 02 9263 5555 or email us at impacttv@wesleymission.org.au.
We're looking at some of John Wesley's sermons, and although I can't preach them like John Wesley could, clearly he had his own way of doing that, I want to refer to one of his perhaps most famous sermons entitled The Catholic Spirit. Wesley had a stubborn loyalty to those things that he held dear to. And this was at a time when there were many controversies and people had different opinions about this or that. And he had an essential core of the Christian faith. He agreed with those who contended over some of the most bitter of controversy. But in this particular sermon from the Old Testament, the basic spirit of tolerance of different opinions arises. It's a quite remarkable sermon for its day. And in 2 Kings chapter 10, verse 15, we read these words. After he left there, he came upon Jehoshaphat, the son of Rechab, who was on his way to meet him. Jehu greeted him and said, "Are you in accord with me, as I am with you?" "I am," Jehoshaphat said. "If so," said Jehu, "give me your hand." Wesley said love was due to all humanity, but we owe a particular love to God himself. The Apostle John, he said as much. There are 2 hindrances to this. One is people don't think alike. And secondly, people don't walk alike. We are very, very different. So if we're going to live that life of the love of God and the love for one another, we face a basic challenge. We are so fundamentally different. But the story of Jehu and Jehoshaphat tells us a number of things. Firstly, Jehu does not inquire about Jehoshaphat's opinions. They were certainly different. Now, he was a Rechabite. Now, if you don't know much about the Rechabites, there's at least a few things you ought to know. Firstly, they had strict ways of understanding the law. Not only did they not cut their hair or do this, some people suggest John the Baptist might have belonged to one of these kind of traditions, but they had some very, very strict rules. And neither of them worried about the differences that one had from the other. Every person can have opinions and can have differences, but Jehu does not worry about the other person's opinions. Secondly, Jehu doesn't inquire about the modes of worship. You say, oh, well, that doesn't matter much. Some of the biggest fights that have ever happened in Christian history have happened about the way people have worshipped and what they've liked and what they haven't liked. They would have different. The Rechabite worshipped at Jerusalem, where Jehu tolerated different kinds of worship, even the worship of golden calves. As with opinions, so with practice. We are very, very different. And here we find Wesley saying, don't let those things get in the way. Thirdly, a point that he made was what is meant by the question when it applies to us. It asks whether you walk by faith. It asks what are the things that mark out your living. Are you divided about the things that really are of secondary importance? It asks whether you believe in Jesus Christ as he's revealed in your life, whether faith has filled you with the energy and love of the Holy Spirit. It asks whether you're employed in doing God's will. Now, this lovely phrase in this Old Testament text, give me your hand, doesn't say, be of my opinion. It doesn't mean, I will be of your opinion. It doesn't say, worship as I do, nor does it say, I will worship as you do. It says, give me your hand. That's what should unite us. What does that mean for me, and what does it mean for you? Love the other person as a companion in the kingdom of God. And with that love, a real spirit of long-suffering, part of the fruit of the Spirit that we read in the Gospels and is clearly spoken about in Galatians chapter 5, has to be real. Commend me to God in your prayers. Provoke me to love and good works, and love me in deed and in truth. So Wesley talked about the Catholic spirit, and he certainly demonstrated it throughout his ministry as he reached out to people that others wouldn't do, as he crossed the boundaries, as he knew what it was to hold hands with people of very different opinions, very different styles of worship, but with hearts alive and alert to Jesus Christ. This doesn't mean that we have an indifference to all opinions. It doesn't mean to say that public worship doesn't matter, but it does mean that the Catholic love, that all-embracing love, for that's what the word means, must be for all people. And it must be driven by a Catholic, all-embracing spirit of companionship and care.
To commemorate 200 years of faith and pioneering care in Australia, Wesley Mission has released a publication documenting its work in the community. For more information on today's people, today's story, you can contact us on 02 9263 5555 or email us at impacttv@wesleymission.org.au.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed that. It's the end of our series on John Wesley, where we've looked at his ministry and his work. And here we are at the heart of London. Next week we're back in Sydney, where of course the work continues that John Wesley began through the work of Wesley Mission. Goodbye and God bless you.